straight away now to our guest commentator for his personal take on the news and issues of the day. And tonight I'm joined in the studio by the current affairs analyst and professor of communications at Baze University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Great to see you, Prof.
Thank you, Charles, for having me.
I'm sure you've been following everything that we've been talking about. I could see you sort of listening. Let's start with Professor Kingsley Moore, speaking on the back of the NESG summit, economic summit, which has been taking place. It would not be an exaggeration to say that, in his assessment, Nigeria is in some form of depression right now.
I think he reflected that typically excellently. You know, always very eloquent in the manner in which he articulates Nigeria's problem. You know, particularly economic problem. But I found one thing very interesting, that he didn't just focus on economics, he also connected with politics and other sections. Philosophy, politics, philosophy, and other elements, sectors of the society has been integral to the performance of the economic system. And of course, this reminds me of what Karl Marx said ages ago, that yes, the economy can be very, very strong, represented as the infrastructure. Other sectors, you know, align with it, are around it, and he described them as superstructure. That's what I thought he also underlined, you know, that there's an connectedness, I beg your pardon, of all these sectors. And if one is problematic, of course, it will rub off on the others. And again, he went further to specify, you know, to identify the question of institutional failure that we've been talking about. He mentioned one institution that was problematic in the last 10 years. But beyond that, we also highlighted this, not just central bank, several other institutions, you know, because we regard, you know, the man as often the entity that we should privilege over the system. And of course, again, it reminds us of the description of the Nigerian state, African state, as largely neo-patrimonial. Neo-patrimonial in the sense that nepotism, favoritism, ethnicism, you know, connectionism are integral and insidious, you know, in the way the state is run. You know, the state is seen as individual, as the property of the individual, and of course the individual thinks that it should go further, you know, to ensure that, you know, those who benefit from his presence in government should be himself, family members, friends,
absolutely,
far beyond the society. Very, very unfortunate, you know, but of course what we have to be looking forward to, it may happen within the context of the general picture, or even at the individual. If it's not at the collective, it can happen at the individual section, where we can have individuals, you know, breaking through this narrative, you know, trying to change this perspective, you know, through the action, their performances in office. You know, it may not necessarily be presidential performance. It could be, you know, heads of agencies trying to make a difference, creating a difference, you know, departing from the norm, such that the concentric, unfortunate reversal of the concentric circle of leadership can once more be witnessed. And what is the concentric circle of leadership we're talking about? Where the leader, you know, privileges the community much more than the self, family, friends, you know, or those that can be connected with him or her directly or indirectly. We've got to reverse it. Otherwise, either on a one-off basis or continuously so, or as a collective, as the case could be.
That's a good point. So, given that, in what direction do you think the dynamic is moving right now in Nigeria? I mean, listening to Kingsley Moore, the suggestion appeared to be, although he didn't quite say it that way, that in the last few months, since the new government came into office, many Nigerians would say that suffering in this country has massively gone up.
I doubt if there's anybody that is not feeling it. We feel it every day. Sometimes it can even be depressing, you know. And sometimes you also want to look at those in power, and you probably want to also sympathize with them, that what more could they have done, you know, because sometimes you see government policies as simply becoming a gamble. You know, you try this method today, it's not working, you try another method, you know, and it may not also work, you know, and this, of course, they are fundamental long-term causes of these occurrences. But again, there are immediate gains that we'll have made, you know, perhaps if we got some things right, you know, and maybe, like I always like to say, we'll keep our hope alive, but in keeping, it is becoming really very difficult to again keep this hope alive.
Right.
Faced with mounting challenges, but in the circumstance, we just have to keep trying.
But I mean,
and hope that the leaders will get it right.
Yeah. Do you think the government's proposals are commensurate with the size of the problems Nigeria is facing, or are they simply too weak?
No, the statement has been established severally that we have to increase our productive base, and the production has to be export oriented, if we want to help ourselves, for instance, at the level of forex. I'm not sure that it's a short-term solution. It seems a long-term solution, in my own opinion. And of course, I heard Professor Mogalu saying that in the short term, we'll probably need portfolio investors. But how do we get these portfolio investors? Faced with uncertainty in the political sphere, we're still going through court adjudication, with respect to the last election. All these things can create some level of uncertainty for people who are looking for safe havens, to invest. I think, again, the ball will be back at the doors or at the steps of our leaders, to think not necessarily out of the box, but probably without the box. We need new things.
Throw the box away.
Yeah, throw the box away and be very creative,
right.
Imaginative, original, extraordinarily, so that, we can actually see not just the momentum, but realize, some changes, some improvement away from the kind of doldrum that we seem to be in at the moment.
Well, let's move away from Nigeria and turn to the Middle East and the war between Israel and Hamas, the intractability of it. We're talking to Liv Kunins-Berkowitz there, who's the media coordinator for Jewish Voice for Peace. They're quite a vocal pressure group, and they've been holding protests in America. They had a sit-in in Congress. And their argument basically is that what America is doing is wrong in giving support to Israel to be attacking the Palestinians. But of course, on the other side, people in Israel are accusing them of anti-Zionism, and because they actually say they're an anti-Zionist organization, and saying that anti-Zionism is equivalent to anti-Semitism, which is a bit perverse because they're all Jews. What are your thoughts on what you're saying?
Well, it's a very complex situation. We keep talking about it. And of course, when you have this kind of emotional conflict, you expect to see different sides multiplying. But of course, it's also a reflection of the American society where they are operating, a very free society, largely so, permissive of all kinds of voices, voices that you ordinarily expect not to have emerged, against the background of the direction of their government. But it just tells us how elegant the society can be, how much they cherish freedom. But fundamentally, I think if we have to resolve that conflict, solutions have been profiled in the past, but the short-term solution seems to be that, parties who are sympathetic to both sides, influential parties in the West, and on the other side, we'll have to really intervene. And of course, we need some genuine level of intervention. And when we're talking about parties on the West, and on the other side, we're talking about influential Western societies, United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and such other countries. And on the other side, you're talking about Saudi Arabia, Qatar, etc., etc. Perhaps having some much more meaningful intervention, because the provocation, on both sides is really deep-seated, And do not forget, very obviously so, that the might of one is definitely much more than the other. But again, if your might is much more than the other person that you are entangled with, doesn't mean that you definitely be victorious, because sometimes, I've said it before, the mind can matter more than matter.
It's interesting that a recent survey, and I suppose the Israeli government, which is very right-wing at the moment, is actually building a lot of what it's doing on domestic public opinion. And a recent survey of Israeli public opinion suggested that 65% of the Israeli Jews, they only questioned the Jews because you've got Arabs in Israel as well, but 65% of the Israeli Jewish population support a ground invasion, 21% oppose it, and 40% have no opinion. Does that fit into what you'd expect at a time like this in terms of public opinion in Israel?
Do you know, in the initial instance, there was suspicion that it was because of the agitation of the right-wing members, in the Israeli politics that led Netanyahu to somewhat jettison the peace process. And of course, because the peace process, there was probably no hope for those on the other side. They were thinking of what to do to probably pepper the Israeli government. And unfortunately, they did what they did, which has provoked Israel on the other side. In this case, I think it is understandable if a majority are thinking about ground invasion. But they should also remember what President Biden told them, that they should avoid blind rage. I remember he used the word blind rage. Yeah. And of course, they should learn from their own experience.
They should avoid being blinded by rage.
Blinded by rage.
But that's pretty much what you were saying. Yeah.
And of course, you reminded them of their own experience going into Iraq.
Absolutely.
They went on ground.
And the mistakes they made.
Boots on the ground in Iraq. It took time for them to recover. I'm not even sure they are probably recovered. And of course, several deaths, several thousands of American soldiers were lost in Iraq. If they go into Gaza, we're not sure what will happen. Yes, they will have the upper hand, but of course they will suffer avoidable losses as well. So perhaps, reason should probably come into play. Now we're witnessing the death of reason, which is causing these perpetual, dastardly, disastrous outcome that we're witnessing, and of course that is offensive to our sensibilities as humans. And of course, each time you remember it, you just know that the world is generally not at peace.
Yeah, well,
and that's not what we want as humans.
Absolutely. The Israelis prize Israeli life so much because they see themselves as a very small group surrounded by all these Arabs.
Yes, and of course they also, each time they think about the Holocaust, it hurts them.
Oh yeah, of course.
They want to do
it brings back very dark memories.
Very dark memories.
But for them, but what is interesting about this survey is that, like a couple of years ago, if the surveys that were done would say to them, if we go to attack these people, we're likely to have a casualty figure of about 500 dead Israeli soldiers. And they would say, absolutely not, don't do it. But this time they're saying, go ahead and do it. So that suggests the level of anger and the way that those 1,400 odd people were mutilated.
And there are so many ways we can look at it. When you are taking a decision in the position, and when you are actually angry, you are likely to make mistakes. We hope that you do not make this mistake. And we've also heard about the IDF spokesman, saying that whether or not they're going to go in, they're not going to announce it. All decisions will remain discreet, largely. Coming from what you expect of the ideal military operation. But overall, what we should be angling for is peace to reign in the Middle East.
And on that very hopeful note, I want to thank you very much indeed. Professor Abiodun Adeniyi is a current affairs analyst and professor of communications at Baze University in Abuja. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and California, bye-bye and thank you for watching.